So my day job is CTO at Air. I used to be a radio presenter back in my late teens, early 20s. And today I'm going to talk to you about a side project that I started about 12 months ago. That means that as of August, I'm now back on the air. But it was my idea for how I could be on air that got me excited to make a return. So the show is called 10 Most Wanted. It's 1 hour, a daily top 10 countdown that I produce for syndication Monday to Thursday evenings. Any station using any playout system can broadcast it. But unlike any other syndicated show that I know of, each station gets a fully tailored version of the show, and I don't touch a single playout system at all. So typically with a syndicated show, someone creates long segments of the show and then makes those audio files available to stations via Dropbox or FTP. The station then copies those files into their playout system, and that's basically it. And when you listen to one of these shows, usually what you hear is an identical show, no matter which station you're listening to. They can't really include bespoke references without the workload going up considerably. Also, the now playing information on the website and app usually stops because it's hard to do when it's one long audio file. So there's room for improvement, not only in what comes out the speakers, but the way that it's put together. In the UK, networking is more common than syndication. A station takes a live feed, usually produced by the same parent company, and localized elements are included by triggering separate audio for each station. But this requires the main output to be played out live from one place and for all the local elements to be exactly the same length. And it's hard to do if all the stations aren't owned by the same company, ideally using the same playout system. So if you listen to my syndicated show, you'll hear quite a few things that are unusual. In between each song, you'll hear imaging tagged with the station's own branding in their station voice. Whenever you hear me do a link, you'll hear me mention the name or the tagline of the station, or promote the next show, or do a station live read. And you'll notice that the now playing information continues throughout the show as normal. And unlike networking, all of these localized elements aren't recorded to specific durations. The show sounds right at home on each station. The average listener would have a hard time telling that I'm not just another presenter on each station. I'm not pressing hotkeys. I'm not interacting with each station's playout system. They could all be different. And I'm not spending time every day producing a separate version of the show for each station. So how is it done? Well, I'd like to tell you where the idea came from. And for that, I need to take you back to the early noughties. To the early days of bedroom internet radio. That's where I got started. But it's also the time I discovered I could listen to radio on the internet from other parts of the world. And the station that I fell in love with and caught my curiosity was Z100 in New York. And back then, at 6 p.m. each weeknight, they would air a syndicated show called Most Requested. And it was hosted by this guy, Carson Daly, who was also a big name MTV presenter. Here he is with Britney Spears. And the show's format will sound very familiar. 1 hour in the evening, a daily top 10. But it was on about 140 stations across the US. But Carson certainly wasn't live, and there was no networking. And yet, when I listened to the show on Z100, it very much sounded like he was presenting just on that station. I'd like to play you a short clip from the archive.
Most requested.
Z100. Z100, you say it and I'm going to play it. Go ahead.
Hey, Carson, it's Elena from Garden City, and I want to hear Usher Confessions Part 2.
No problem. Here it is on Z100.
Thanks.
Number 7.
Z100, New York's #1 hit music station. That was Maroon 5. She Will Be Loved. All right, we got Adam Sandler on the line, who's already being hilarious. We'll talk to him about his new CD right after song 4. This is JoJo with Leave, Get Out. Z100.
Well, as a radio nerd and a tech nerd, I was fascinated. How did they do this, and how did they make it sound so slick? But it turned out it was quite controversial at the time. Not only was it voice tracking, but it was enabling DJs to sound local and live. Shocking. The New York Times even wrote an article about it, which is still available to read now from February 2003. Well, the production team had to give Carson scripts, record everything, put it into a database, and then piece the show together by hand. So the versions of his show in the biggest markets had a localized playlist. Carson never knew what order the songs were played on his show. He just recorded the introductions, and then they were reused for each market. And as you heard, they would stitch different parts of links together seamlessly. Well, the challenge of putting a show together like this and making it sound slick was right up my street. But I had no interest in manually producing separate versions of a show. For me, the fun was building something that worked like magic that meant I had to do as little as possible when it came to producing the show. The software had to do the heavy lifting. Well, my idea was to write an app that not only would be used to produce the show, but also to distribute it and also to play it out for each station too. By never actually mixing down the show into flat audio segments, each individual element of the show could be transferred to each station's PC, played individually in sequence, and that way I'd potentially solve the now playing issue too. When I gave this a go in my teenage years, I hit some constraints. All I knew how to write was Visual Basic, which I learnt at school, but the app I wrote fell short in a critical way: the timing of the audio. So this is what I was aiming for. This is an example link structure. It had to stop and start all of the audio elements really accurately. If it wasn't accurate, you'd hear sweepers playing over the top of sweepers, and worst case, me talking over myself. And that's what happened, because the speed of your PC dictated how the show sounded, which most of the time was terrible, so the software in the show didn't last very long. Well, fast forward almost 2 decades, and I haven't touched Visual Basic since. These days, I spend most of my time writing JavaScript, the language that powers interactivity on every website you use every day. And JavaScript has evolved a lot over the last few years. The development that's relevant to this story is what's called the Web Audio API. Web audio is incredibly powerful. It does a lot of stuff, way more than I need. But something it does really well that I'm interested in is accurate timing. It lets you set exactly when you want some audio to play in relation to other audio, and it was this that set off the spark in my mind. I wondered, could I have another go at this project, but this time actually make it work properly? So I started thinking about what was the most important thing it needed to do that I'd not done in JavaScript before. And that aspect was playing out a sequence of audio clips to the exact timing that I wanted. It had to do this perfectly, otherwise it was a complete non-starter. So I began with a very simple prototype. I got it working. This is what it looked like. Okay, so what it looked like at this stage wasn't really that important. It just had to play the audio exactly how I wanted it to. Once I'd nailed this, that was the main unknown out of the way, and I was happy with what was coming out of the speakers. So it was time to get building out the app. I called it Smart VT, and it's a web app wrapped in a desktop app. What does that mean? Well, you can use it in a web browser, but to do some extra clever stuff, you open it in its own desktop app that you install, and I'll explain why in a moment. This is the stack. It's written entirely in JavaScript using a framework called Next.js that makes building an app like this much easier than starting from scratch. I use a hosting service called Vercel, which takes care of a lot of dull stuff for you. It uses AWS to store the audio files and host a database. It uses a framework called Prisma, otherwise known as an ORM, for talking to the database. And to turn it into a desktop app, it uses Electron, which in turn uses Node.js. Electron is great for quickly turning a web app into a desktop app without having to write an entire desktop app from scratch. Well, turning the web app into a desktop app was very important. Firstly, it gives you a consistent and reliable environment, so no browser inconsistencies to deal with if there are any problems. Secondly, web browsers are really easy to close, and we don't want that. In fact, if you click the cross in the corner of Smart VT, it doesn't quit. It actually minimizes it to the tray in the corner. It can start up automatically if the studio PC is restarted, and you can push out automatic updates and you get a notification. Smart VT needed to be able to communicate with the playout system to send commands back and forth. As a desktop app with Node.js, it can have its own built-in TCP server and client. And in Electron, you can get the sound cards on the PC so the user can choose where to send the audio. So that's the tech. How does it actually work? Well, I don't mix down any audio. All the audio files are kept separate, including songs, sweepers, links, and beds. In the case of songs and sweepers, I set intro and outro markers so the system knows how they can overlap and where links should fit in the intros and outros. The audio files are uploaded to the cloud where they're stored. You can cross that one off. And then they're transferred to each client where they're cached. The client then plays out the audio in the required sequence, taking into account the duration of each piece of audio, the intro and the outro markers, etc. On the client side, it's able to time a segment to a specific duration by smartly cutting the ends of songs. It's also able to ping the playout system to start ad breaks and receive commands to resume the program. It can also ping other services to send now playing information. So in a moment, I'm going to show you how I put an episode together. First, though, a quick explanation of some of the things you're about to see. Each episode is made up of a series of slots. There are 4 main types. Static is a specific piece of audio. Split lets me assign different pieces of audio for different stations. Dynamic lets me set rules, and the system will later substitute it for a suitable piece of audio that matches all the rules. Sequence is a mini series of sweepers or voice clips. So here's a typical seg with 3 individual sweepers between 2 songs. And the best way to handle this in Smart VT is to put the 3 sweepers into a sequence block like this. So the reason for this is that those 3 sweepers are then treated like one item in the log. This means they can collectively be run over the intro of Adele, Easy on Me, like this. So the system basically treats it as a song, followed by effectively one long sweeper into the next song. This makes for a really slick seg. A sequence can contain sweepers or voice clips, or both. And this timing is done by the client at each station. So if one station has a longer local station sweeper than another, that's fine. The timing isn't done centrally. Next, I'd like to show you Smart VT and give you a demo of how I put a show together. So here we are about to create today's episode. I always start with a template, which sets up the structure of the show, so I don't have to do that every day. So this is the top of my new episode, and you can see the template has been copied in. This show is broken up into 4 segments, and you can see the first segment starts with an opener sweeper. Then there's a sequence item, that's the green block. This is my opening link. The blue block you see is a dynamic block. You can see from the rules in it that it will automatically select an asset for me, and that's going to be a clip of me introducing the next song. I record myself introducing each song I play, so these can be dropped in automatically. The sequence also has a bed assigned to it. Quick point on those. They only get played if they need to be. If there's enough of a song intro to roll under the sequence, the bed will automatically not be played. I don't have to worry about that. You'll also see a button in the top right corner labeled Songs Only. This view lets me easily drop in all of the songs for the episode without everything else getting in the way. Here's what it looks like to select an asset. In this example, I'm looking for an Ed Sheeran song to insert. Back to the main editor, and in this example, I've clicked into a sequence slot at the beginning of the show, and I'm going to replace the generic opener asset and record a new link for today's episode. So by clicking the 3 dots, I get a menu, and I can click Add Above, and then I get to choose what type of slot I want to add. Static, split, or dynamic. Those are the only 3 valid options here. You'll see a 4th option there, though, Record. So this is a time saver for quickly recording something and inserting it with minimal admin. So I'll select that. Then I get a pop-up audio recorder. This is me recording a link. And when I'm done, I tap stop and save recording. And then I get a chance to do some basic edits. The trim silence button there was a tricky one to code, but it's a huge time saver for cutting the silence off either end of the recording. Back to the start of the episode again. And you can see in the sequence block there, the recording I just did. I can go ahead and record more links if I want, but I've also got a database of generic links recorded, and they're automatically selected by the system using the dynamic slot. So if I really want to, I can leave it, and those will be used. When I'm done, I tap the Generate button in the top left corner. This creates a copy of this episode for each individual station that is going to broadcast the show. Here's a list of recent episodes, and the one I'm working on is the one at the top for Tuesday. Underneath, you'll see there's 2 generated episodes for the 2 B radio stations, and next to those, you'll see it says not released. This means that they've been built, but the stations don't yet have access to them, so they can't go to air just yet. If I want to, I can now make bespoke changes to a station's version of this episode, and let's take a quick look at one of those episodes. So the main thing to notice is there are no dynamic slots and no split slots. They've gone and they've been replaced by their static equivalents. So if there was a split, it's been swapped for this station's asset. You can't insert a dynamic or a split slot on this screen. Okay, back to the list of episodes. And when I'm ready, I tap the 3-dot menu on the right, and I can click Check for all issues, and the system does some basic checks for me. If I'm happy, though, I click Release All for transmission. Once I do that, these episodes will now be available to the stations. In the hours leading up to when an episode is due to air, the app checks if it's available, and if so, it downloads all of the audio files automatically, except ones downloaded before they're played from the cache. If the internet goes down during the show, it's no problem. Everything is already loaded in advance, so it has no effect. A quick look at what it looks like to listen to or play an episode. You get this bar across the bottom of the app. While one segment is playing, the next one is prepared in memory. The secret sauce is how the audio is scheduled in advance to play exactly how I want it to, including fading songs out and handling beds. And while we're here, I'd like to play you a very short clip of the show. and then I'm done. So you can see what all of this sounds like. So here we go.
That's what I really want.
Hit music now, 95.6 B radio. Lil Nas X, That's What I Want, song 4 on your daily top 10. It's Gav. I'm looking forward to hearing more tracks from Elton John's Lockdown Sessions album soon on the countdown. He's got tracks featuring Young Thug and Charlie Puth on the way. Here's his tune with Dua Lipa now. Song 3 is Cold Heart. It's B radio.
Most wanted.
New music. Radio Newquay.
New Craig David teaming up with MNEK. This is Who You Are. It's playing on Radio Newquay.
Gav Richards.
10 most wanted.
Black Country Extra.
Hey, it's Gav. Thanks for tuning in tonight. I've got more of your most wanted songs to play. Here's Ed Sheeran and Overpass Graffiti. Song 4 tonight on Black Country Extra.
This is a dark parade.
All right, there we go. Thank you so much for listening.